Andrew Fisher, hello.
Hiya.
How's it going?
It's good. I mean, it's an eventful day, but...
Busy day, and quite fortuitously, we've got you in our studio. So we'll be talking about all of the day's big events, big resignations, big news in the Labour Party. But first, before we get into all of that crazy stuff, I think perhaps in your own words, you could explain to our audience who you are and what you do. I know sort of people who are more informed politically will know that you're involved in Labour's 2019 manifesto, but tell us in your own words.
So I started working for Jeremy Corbyn when he was doing his 2015 leadership election, and I ran the policy on his campaign then. I then went to work for the Labour Party as Director of Policy and then Executive Director of Policy, and so was involved in both the 2017 and the 2019 manifestos with a big team. It's not a solo effort by any means. It's a huge team effort to get that sort of thing done, especially in a snap election where you don't have that kind of forewarning that there's an election and you're going to need one soon. And then I left the Labour Party after we'd lost the 2019 election, and I now do things like this, which is much more relaxing generally.
We'll see. We'll see if that's still your view at the end.
Column for the iPaper and for Inside Croydon, which is a local news site where I live. And have much more of a work-life balance now and see my kids, which is nice.
Always positive.
Yeah.
So one of the big pieces of news today, and we'll start with this because of your experience working in the Labour Party, is the fact that Keir Starmer announced this morning that Jeremy Corbyn will not be standing as a Labour MP if he contests the Islington North seat in the next election. First of all, your reaction to that news?
I mean, there's a slight disconnect, isn't there? And Keir Starmer saying today, the EHRC have given us the all clear. We've got this independent complaints procedure, which is fair. There's no political interference. And by the way, that bloke's purged. Through no process, no inquiry. In fact, Jeremy Corbyn was suspended, obviously, after his response to the EHRC report in 2020. And then he was reinstated by the party's disciplinary body as a member. And then this new process was added where the whip could be withdrawn rather than automatically reinstated, which is what usually happens in those circumstances where an MP is reinstated as a member. So it's a strange day to have Keir Starmer say, we've got a fair process, it's all fair, that bloke's purged, and any of you that like his stuff, you can all get out as well, in a sort of, somewhere between macho and passive-aggressive sort of way. I can't quite, he doesn't quite cut it as macho, but it's more than passive-aggressive, do you know what I mean? It's somewhere in that middle ground, which I suspect he likes. But yeah, it's a very weird day, and I don't know what Jeremy will do in response to that. But I think it shows how factional and sectarian the Labour Party still is, and this belief that it's all that's in the past. Actually, it's continued. It predated Jeremy Corbyn by a long way, as the Ford report showed, and continues to this day.
Yeah, my understanding is that quite a lot of those associated with his office were sort of telling him, Jeremy, you're not going to be able to look at the signs that you're not going to be able to stand as Labour MP, and he couldn't quite believe it, really. And I guess this is kind of the final confirmation. It's writing's on the wall for him now. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's right. I mean, he's been a member for, I don't know exactly, but it's over 50 years. He joined in his teens and he's now in his 70s. So yeah, it's well over 50 years. He's been a councillor, he's been an MP for 40 years this year, and obviously leader of the Labour Party. And yet he's not going to be allowed to stand. And more, I think, unfairly, the people of Islington North, the members in Islington North, aren't going to get to choose whether they want him or not. And actually, it should be their choice. I mean, Keir Starmer stood in 2020, when he was running for leader, saying it should be local members who choose their candidate, except in Islington North, where he decides who can and can't stand. I mean,
I think not even the most informed observers of the Labour Party will recognise a little bit of a trend there that Keir Starmer said something in 2020 and does something differently.
Different in 2022.
Now, because 23. Because yes, you're right. He said that he wouldn't that it was local selections that should happen and shouldn't be interference or whatever, and that's happened here. What do you think that says about him as a politician? Do you think that's canny and effective politics, speaking to one constituency when you're contesting the Labour Party election? So you have to talk to the membership, be more left-wing. You then get into the leader's office, and now your constituency is the country. So you have to perhaps move to the centre a bit more to appeal to a broader base. And then if that election is won, he could change again. Let's say he gets into power, maybe pushes back more to the left, a bit more to the right. But the point is, when he has to win an election, he speaks to the constituency that he's trying to win. I mean, do you think that points to him being a canny political operator, or maybe you see it differently?
I would call it dishonest. I mean, I'm a bit simple in my politics, perhaps. I think you should say what you mean, argue for what you believe in, even if it's unpopular. You know, the point of politics is to try and change people's minds, not just find out where people's minds are and go, I'll pander to that. You know, that way leads to controls on immigration mugs for Labour elections that they don't win. So, you know, to me, politics is about campaigning, it's about trying to change people's minds, it's about trying to build a consensus, not just going, what do the focus groups say public opinion is, and going, well, I'll just position myself here for that, and I'll steer over here on this, and I'll be totally incoherent as long as it accords with wherever the public mood is on a particular day. I think that's quite weak. And I think that's what's built a lot of distrust in politics, because, you know, when you say to people, you know, sometimes about politicians, you know, you get people on the right laud certain people that I don't personally respect, but people like Margaret Thatcher or, you know, even Anne Widdecombe, I think, had a bit of this about her, and people on the right even say this about Tony Benn. You know, at least you knew where you stood with them, and I think there's something more honest about that sort of politics, that we can have a debate, you know. And I think there's something quite cowardly, I think, about not, and it's not just Keir Starmer. This is a much broader problem in British politics over decades, I would say, is where politicians think they can't win an argument, so don't even try, and that, I think, is partially why Britain's in the state it's in, is because there are simple answers and there are good answers. And, you know, if you always pick the simple answer, you get farther and further away from the path of the good answer. And that's why we are where we are, I think. Yeah,
there's a lot of analysis post-2019. You know, some of the, certainly in the immediate term, the fallout was, oh my God, this extraordinary result in the North and the Midlands. These sort of traditional Labour heartlands have swung to the Tories. But if you do the analysis and you look back at the results, go to 97, go to 92, you can actually see the Labour vote, dwindling from then onwards. And I've seen people make the argument, I'm not saying it's one I necessarily agree with, that as the Labour Party sort of shifted towards the centre a little, well, not a little bit, significantly away from its more socialist trade union roots, that voters were kind of going, well, actually, you know what, I'm not going to bother. You know, if there's a degree of dishonesty, if there's a degree of centrism, if there's a degree of sort of the professional politician, if you like, because that's kind of what I'm getting at with Blair, they stay at home. And that 2019 actually wasn't some kind of shock event. It was a pattern borne out over a significant period of time.
It was accelerated by Brexit, and if you look at the votes in 2019, and you look at the polling of why people shifted their vote from Labour to Conservative, it was mainly over Brexit. That was the chief reason. It's not the only reason. Some of it was about the Labour leadership and our failings as well. You've got to be honest about that. I told you I'd do honesty. Do you know what I mean? Even if it's, you know, a bit painful sometimes, you've got to, though. You know, you should be honest with yourself and with others. But it corresponded with the Brexit result in 2016, where I think 400 odd constituencies voted to leave and 200 voted to remain. And what did you get in 2019? 200 voted Labour, about 400 voted to vote for the Tories. So, you know, it's not surprising we ended up with that result. And in a sense, there was this sort of cultural shift whereby how you feel about Europe, the world, migration has replaced politics, class politics, around what do I get as a social wage? What do I get as an actual wage? What's my pension? What are social security benefits like? And actually, you know, this week we've seen the Labour Party focus on, you know, what Matt Hancock or Boris Johnson spent on their stationery bill on credit cards, rather than talking about the biggest cost of living crisis in British history. You know, I find it quite odd that there's these sort of trivialities that keep getting thrown up by both sides as well. I'm not just criticising Labour on this. You know, the trans debate is, again, you know, obviously for trans people it's a fight for their rights and equality. I'm not dismissing that, but you see politicians weaponising it in a way that I think just doesn't affect the majority of people. I don't think most people, you know, the people I speak to, my family, my friends, aren't sitting there going, well, I won't vote for somebody who doesn't support the Gender Recognition Reform Act, and, you know, it's just not the main issue in people's minds at the moment. And so you see this kind of constant whipping up of fear about small boat crossings, when no politician dare say, well, actually the scale of it's minor. This is small. You know, we take fewer refugees than Spain, than Germany, than France, you know, than Italy. You know, we are not taking a lot of refugees. Most more stay in France than come to the UK. You know, how many politicians are saying that? And instead we're getting this, oh no, it is serious, and people have got legitimate concerns. And well, they've got legitimate concerns based on complete falsehoods. You know, I was going to say something ruder there, but I'll tone my language down. You know, but it is, and it's frustrating that there isn't, I think, a kind of stature of politician that's prepared to stand up and take on some of these arguments. Instead, you see this constant retreat into, well, let's talk about this instead. And I think, to an extent, all parties are guilty of that. I can't think of a politician I kind of think, wow, not a prominent politician, a frontline politician, that I think, wow, there's somebody I really respect in British politics. And I suspect a lot of the British public feel the same.
Yeah, no doubt. Last week, there was an interview with Lee Anderson, the new deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, and he was asked on sort of what policy platform, how would the Conservatives campaign in the next general election, and he quite openly said, "I imagine it'll be culture war stuff and the trans debate," and I think that kind of hits on what you're saying, right? It's like, it's not even, here's how we'd like to change the country. It's these are the wedge issues that we're going to try and deploy to cause a fuss. And let's take it back to Starmer briefly, because he gave a speech today as well when he was talking about the left and sort of how the party has changed since 2019. I'd like to quote some of that, if I may. So he said, "The Labour Party is unrecognisable from 2019. It will never go back. It will never again be a party captured by narrow interest, lose sight of its purpose or morals, be brought to its knees by racism or bigotry. If you don't like that, if you don't like the changes we've made, I say the door is open and you can leave." What is your assessment of his categorisation of the Labour Party in 2019, and also what it speaks to more broadly? So the sort of the sidelining of the left, because what he's talking about there, right, is obviously is a more left-wing iteration of the Labour Party.
Yeah, I mean, it's an odd thing, I think, for him to say, given he was in the shadow cabinet in 2019 and, wrote a chapter of the manifesto, alongside others. Obviously, it wasn't just him, but, signed off on that, wanted Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. It's an odd thing to say, we're never going back to that when the party was this hotbed of racism and bigotry. I mean, it's also odd because it's not odd, it's dishonest again, because it's trying to say that was then, we're a completely different party now. And yet the Ford report, which he commissioned, he appointed a QC, or KC as he now would be, to investigate the Labour Party, and that guy came back and said there's a hierarchy of racism operating within the party. Not back in then, well yes it was back then, but also now. So it's not like the Labour Party went haven of anti-racism, terrible racist bigotry, haven of anti-racism again. That's nonsense. I mean, it's nonsense if you just look at the policies that the Labour Party was endorsing, even under Ed Miliband, who I think of quite warmly generally, but they voted for the 2014 Immigration Act, which basically enabled the Windrush scandal to happen. 6 Labour MPs voted against that, defied the whip, one of which was Jeremy Corbyn, another was John McDonnell, another was Diane Abbott. And yet, there's this kind of way of kind of characterising all that went before as bad and terrible, and that, there's clear problems with Islamophobia. The affiliated Labour Muslim network has said that within the party. It's not, racism is a serious challenge, and if you're a serious anti-racist, you have to be honest about where it is. And there was an anti-Semitism problem in the Labour Party. It didn't begin with Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, actually, if you look at it, the first cases that really caused controversy, in fact, the first case that really caused the issue to break out into the public limelight was Naz Shah, and it wasn't Naz Shah herself that caused that. It was Ken Livingstone going on the radio, making a complete pillock of himself, to be frank, trying to defend her, and then having that kind of altercation with John Mann that just blew the issue up. But that was somebody who was, I think, selected in 2013, 2014, who had posted something allegedly anti-Semitic. I'll be careful because these people are very litigious, over this issue, and understandably. Nobody wants to be labelled an anti-Semite. But, her and a few other candidates had done things like that, and they had never been dealt with. There was no proper disciplinary process. And I found this, I mean, it didn't surprise me entirely, but the scale of it and the just lack of any fair process in Labour's disciplinary procedures did shock me. And actually, if you read the HRC report, as I have, because I'm quite sad and do read internal reports, page, cover to cover, it actually says, there was a lot wrong. It points out all the faults, which, by the way, it's the party HQ that's supposed to be running this, the General Secretary, who, by the way, still sits in the House of Lords as a Labour peer, who was the General Secretary all the way through this period, and seems to be allowed to sit in the House of Lords. That's fine. But, they did say the process improved in 2018 and 2019 when that guy got bundled off to the House of Lords and a new General Secretary, Jenny Formby, came in. So this has been a slow sort of evolution to get the party in order. But you had a massive surge of membership. Yes, there was some anti-Semitic stuff. And the thing is, now, because of social media, people say things on social media or think they're saying it on social media, and it's written down, it's in print, it's got a digital signature forever. And whereas people probably made those comments all the way through, history, but said them in meetings or said them in private. They're now saying them in public, thinking that they're saying it to their Facebook friends or their followers on Twitter and nobody else, and that it's, you know, yesterday's chip paper within 2 minutes because people have scrolled past it. Actually, it's there forever. And that's not to justify what people are saying. I'm just saying it's easier to pick up now and find instances of racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia. But it seems to me that Keir Starmer is trying to say that was all an issue then, and I get why he's doing that for electoral reasons. You know, not that I think that had a huge electoral impact, to be honest, but I see why he's saying it. Say, I'm different, we've changed, now I'm going to change the country. I get that nice little line, but you're playing with an issue that's actually really serious. And for people in the party who have been the victims of racism, I mean, the people who abused Diane Abbott in those private email chats, which were the sort of right-wing staff of the party, if you like, you know, the Ford report says they were overt racist tropes. Now imagine if that had been against a Jewish MP, and that had been me, Seamus and Carrie, for example, the senior management within Lotto, that had been using that sort of stuff. We'd be out. Rightly, by the way. But these people are still Labour Party members that were abusing Diane Abbott in what a report commissioned by Keir Starmer, by somebody he appointed, has said is overt racist tropes against Diane Abbott and others. I think Clive Lewis and Dawn Butler were both abused in some of that stuff. But those people are still in the party. So again, it's just this lack of seriousness about it that frustrates me. But, you know, if you look at it on a media level, on how politics is done, you know, grandstanding in the press, and which never gets analysed properly and is, you know, gone past tomorrow, it works because, you know, Keir Starmer has looked strong, said he's not a racist, said the last lot was awful, and now he's a respectable, you know, wears his tie and is buttoned up and suited and looks like a prime minister. Job done for him. But it's not serious.
What's that David Cameron line? It was like, do your shirt, put on your tie, sing the national anthem, wasn't it? Yeah.
I'd rather Jeremy Corbyn looked a scruff than, you know, privatised the NHS and bombed Libya. Do you know what I mean? That's you know, I'll take that.
Yeah. So you were talking then about the reality of the situation, right? And the way Starmer's presenting it, the way it plays in the media, and then the electoral consequences. Labour is, on average, let's say, about 20 points ahead in the polls right now.
Yeah.
How much of that, if any of that, do you think can be down to? Like, I'm trying to tie that together with the factionalism that we're seeing, right? You know, what is the purpose of the factionalism? Is it to deliver that polling lead? Is the polling lead separate to the factionalism? And if so, what's the point of kind of purging the left from the party? Do you see what I'm trying to get at? Yeah,
totally. And again, I don't think there's a simple answer to that. So I mean, there's two aspects to it. One is Labour is ahead in the polls chiefly because the Tory party have imploded since the summer. You know, the scandal after scandal after scandal, the cumulative effect that got rid of Boris Johnson eventually, then Liz Truss, you know, which, you know, trashed the economy to an even greater extent than they already had, and then Rishi Sunak's kind of bungling of the economy since. And, you know, there's no good news. We are in the deepest cost of living crisis in history, on record, and they've got no answer. Your energy bills are about to go up 40% in April. So it's not surprising the Tories are doing badly. They've kind of imploded. They're still fighting amongst themselves. There's a big faction of them that want to bring back Boris Johnson. It doesn't look stable. They've had multiple resignations. I think Raab's going to go soon once that bullying inquiry finishes. And certainly it's done them huge damage. And I think Labour would be ahead whoever was leader at this point. Do you know what I mean? But there is something to be said, in fairness, that Jeremy Corbyn did scare a certain part of the British media which transmits politics through to people, and there is a certain, you know, there is certain baggage that Jeremy Corbyn had as an activist for 40 years, as somebody who campaigned on controversial issues, that put people off. But I would say the chief thing is Jeremy Corbyn was trying to do something ambitious, and if you're trying to get to there and drag people over to there, that's a harder task than just going, I want to move it this way here. And so for me, our project was much more ambitious. And so I never expected us to be 20 points ahead, even if there'd been a big implosion. Do you mean it? And Theresa May had a big down points and we were ahead by, I think it peaked at 8 points, right? Which we were excited about. Now it looks rubbish, you know, compared to a 20-point lead. Yeah, I'll be honest about it. But we were trying to do something much more ambitious. We were trying to make an argument for public ownership of, you know, water, rail, mail, energy, of, you know, kind of ending this kind of demonisation of anyone on social security, of trying to shift the debate on migration. Not as successfully as we would have liked, but we did, I think, change the tone of that debate quite a bit. especially after 2017, and around ending austerity and being bolder on the economy. Now, if you're saying, oh, look, taxes are at their highest forever, and, I don't want to do anything too much, and we won't be able to do good things when we're in government, I mean, it's hardly an inspiring thing, but it doesn't scare anyone. It makes people think, okay, your taxes aren't going up. But actually, what you should be saying is, look, there's loads of people who are really wealthy, who we can tax the bejesus out of, frankly, and it won't affect all of you people. That's the bold argument to make. So if you tax capital gains tax, for example, which is the tax people pay from trading housing and shares and companies and all that sort of thing, and dividends tax as well, then you could raise about 25 billion if you tax that at the same rate as income tax, as work is taxed. And that raises you a load of money to do really good Labour things, and yet they're not making that argument. And I just kind of go, this is so easy. And also, we're going to recruit, so take another example where, again, I just don't think it works. And this is why, maybe we get onto this, I fear for the next Labour government, because Labour will win. Keir Starmer will be, barring accidents or whatever, he will be the next Prime Minister of this country. But he says, he's got this policy at the moment about ending non-dom status, and, you can argue about whether it does raise 3 billion or not. But, we'll expand the number of nurse training places. But we can't recruit nurses at the moment because their pay is so low. If you don't tackle that, you can have, 15 million nurse training places. If people go, it doesn't pay well, I don't want to do it, and it's horrible hours, and it's, it's a grim job that the pay's going backwards on, why would having more training places solve that? You need to recruit and retain people. We lost more nurses last year than we've ever lost in the history of the NHS who left. I think 1 in 9. It's a shocking statistic. How are you going to solve that? You don't just solve that by going, we'll recruit more on the same wage. Well, they're leaving because of that wage. And so, you can go through the same argument around teachers and all these sort of things. So again, it's about the lack of ambition. But in a sense, he doesn't have to do that. If you were being purely cynical, purely tactical, can I win an election with this? You'd look at it and go, actually, I don't need to do much. They're busy setting fire to themselves. I'll just look safe, not rock the boat, and do this. So I get where he's coming from. That's just not a politics I particularly appreciate, because I don't think it actually solves the issue. So what will happen is he'll get into power. He won't do anything about. Let's take him at face value of where he is now. Sit down and talk to the unions, but there's no money available. They'll either carry on going on strike or just go, well, we'll have to put up with it then. But you won't recruit more nurses, and you won't recruit more teachers, and you won't sort the problems. You won't clear the backlog in the NHS because you haven't got the staff to do it. And you're not prepared to put up taxes, so you're not going to put more money into it. So how's it going to get better? Yeah. So for me, it's that lack of ambition that frustrates the hell out of me, more than, saying silly things about, it was all bigoted and anti-Semitic before, and now it's all perfect, and people standing around singing Kumbaya together, because it's, that's not true, is it?
It's when he first became Labour leader, he referenced the 2019 manifesto as the starting point of his policy platform.
2017. He said it was 2017 manifesto was our foundational document.
And then you get 2019 in between, and then most recently, I think he's rode back from that pretty significantly and said sort of forget about that, basically. We're living in, I feel like Britain is a state that wants kind of Northern European welfare standards and public services combined with sort of American taxation, and between the two they don't really mix. And the issues you're talking about, I mean, if we want to talk about staff recruitment, let alone retention, leaving the EU has to play at least some part of the conversation in that, particularly in hospitality, also within the health service. The strikes and the industrial action, again, if you're not going to come in and have a transformative agenda, if you're not going to change the economic picture, and that can be in any sort of way, it can be, it could be improving in work benefits, but it could be increasing economic growth, reducing wealth inequality, improving living standards. I think you're quite right to point out that the situation, it's still broadly the same. What are the points of difference? How are things going to change to enable you to deliver these things? Because like you said, there's non-dom, there's abolishing non-dom status, there's the national sort of nationalised energy provider providing green energy from the most recent party conference, although the detail on that isn't
very sketchy. GB Energy. I mean, I'm not 100% clear on what that means, and it's not. I mean, we had a policy that was nationalising the grid, taking the big six into public ownership. I mean, actually, that's not that radical. Gordon Brown, by the way, at the start of the kind of energy crisis, who's by no means on the kind of left-wing kind of the party, who was, Blairite, Tony Blair's chancellor for however many years it was, 10 or 11, he said we should do what we did with the banks, which again wasn't that radical either, which is if they can't afford to give us our electricity at the current price, we give them an equity loan, which is basically saying we take a stake in your company in exchange for cash so that you can keep going. Because the thing is, without the support, without Ofgem kindly going, here's the energy cap, it's just going up by 95%, which is what it did over the last, between Christmas 2021 to Christmas 2022, every single energy retailer, the people you pay your electricity bill to, would have gone bust. And so Gordon Brown, who again is not a Marxist, not even probably a socialist in the proper sense of the word, a kind of middle of the road social democrat at best, said we should basically force them into public ownership by giving them money only so they can keep going, but take a stake in them as we do, which we would have ended up taking all of them because they're not worth much. Do you know what I mean? They're basically a transit mechanism for the big producers who make the big money, who we need a bigger windfall tax on and need to replace because they're getting it from oil and gas and all the rest of it, into us paying our bills. So that's sort of one element of it, but the Labour Party didn't adopt that. They just went, we'll do a windfall tax and then subsidise it. And their big policy now is, we'll extend it and we'll keep your energy bills where they are. It's just like, people are struggling with their energy bills and Labour will go, we'll keep them where they are. I mean, it's not great, is it?
It's quite a good metaphor, that, isn't it?
Don't worry, we'll keep things as they are. I mean, fair enough, the alternative is it's going to go up by 500 quid in April and you'll lose the universal payment that we had last year, although Labour aren't saying they'll reinstate that either. So it's just very modest. They're not nationalising the national grid, whereas if you want to change how energy is structured in this company, build new renewable onshore and offshore wind, you're going to have to get the grid to do that. So either the government's going to subsidise it, or the national grid's going to put up its cut in order to do it, because it's a private company and it's made billions in profits over the last few years. We were going to take that into public ownership. Now, again, these things aren't that radical, but if you want to transform the economy and transform our energy and create good jobs in doing it, and also get the proceeds of that, because there's no point, to me anyway, the public always subsidising companies to do good things, and then they sort of keep the profits. You end up nationalising the losses and privatising the profits, which is what we've done for years. Do you know what I mean? And you're seeing it now with the water companies. They've made masses of profits for years and years and years. They then go, oh, we've got to invest, and so Ofwat, the regulator, again, is saying, well, that's all right, you can put up water bills by 7%, they're going up this year, in order that the water companies can invest. They've been making millions and millions of profits for years, not invested a penny of it, shoved it all to their shareholders and done share buybacks and all the rest of it, and yet they're allowed to jack up price on us. So it's us paying twice, basically. I mean, water bills are 40% higher now than they were pre-privatisation in the late 80s, 40% in real terms, above inflation. So, again, why isn't this being addressed? Labour's going to come in and regulate it better. We'll be better managers of the same system. It's like, come on, this isn't good enough. And it's just going to disappoint people. That's what frustrates me, is it will disappoint people. They'll get in, they're clearly going to get in, and I understand, exactly why people are kind of fed up with the Tories, and we seem to have reached that point where it's just broken now. Their vote seems to be kind of hovering around 20% or just over, because it's gone. There is pretty much nothing they could do to retrieve it, I don't think. And that's good. Do you know what I mean? I say that as a Labour Party member of 26 years. Do you know what I mean? Great. But what's Labour going to get in and do? And am I inspired by what they're going to get in and do? Not yet. Is the generous interpretation of that?
I think that's a really key point, is people talked about Boris Johnson's majority of 80 seats as being a potentially transformative majority. Like, what is he going to do with that? If you're on the left, you're kind of going, Jesus Christ, like, we're in ropey territory here. He's walked into Parliament. If Labour gets the kind of majority that's being forecast, we're talking 100, 150, maybe 200 seats according to some. You can afford 30% of your party to kind of rebel, and you can ignore them. Do you know what I mean? You can,
as Blair did in '97.
You can put through some seriously transformative legislation. You can. It's an opportunity.
As Blair didn't in 1997, unfortunately. But it's not to say they didn't do some good things that made some things better. But did they leave a lasting legacy? Do you know what I mean? If you look back at governments that did that, you've got Attlee and Thatcher and the rest are following in their wake, after the two of them. And the problem is, after the banking crash, that was a point at which, kind of politics naturally should have shifted. The model should have changed. And it happened after the Second World War. It happened after the kind of crises of the 70s. the crises of the 2000s, the 2010s, the 2020s, and we've had multiple, we've had the banking crisis, austerity, Brexit, the pandemic, the energy crisis at the moment with inflation, and nothing's changed. And we've just got kind of these very lightweight politicians who just pretend they can manage the system better and come up with a slogan, whether it's big society or whatever other nonsense they've come up with, or distract us by going on to these kind of culture wars issues, which is a kind of polite way of saying we'd be a bit racist and hate minorities, which has been a long-running theme of the Conservative Party for years. When I was growing up in the 80s, it was single mothers, and I grew up in a single-parent family. That's why I joined the Labour Party, because I hated the Tories, literally visceral. I did, and I still do, because of that. And they demonised them, and they went on to migrants, and they went on to disabled people under Cameron and Osborne, and people on benefits under Thatcher as well. That get on your bike, Norman Tebbit stuff. That's what it is. It's distract with something else to kind of mask our own incompetence or lack of ideas. And our economy has not been working. You had Torsten Bell speak to you a while back, does great stuff with the Resolution Foundation. You look at what's happened to the economy since 2008 on wages, on growth, on productivity. It's just flatlined, at best. Actually, we've gone backwards slightly. Wages aren't going to be where they were in 2008 until 2028, which is unprecedented. There's never been a 20-year period in recorded history, kind of history of British capitalism, basically going back centuries, where that has been the case. And what's the answer to that from our political class? Jeremy Corbyn's terrible. Those trans people. Migrants in boats. I mean, this is crap. People should be demanding better of their politicians. It's frustrating.
Yeah, for sure. And it's how much do you subscribe to the idea that you get the politics that you deserve? Because are the politicians we have a product of a system which kind of is self-propagating, or are they a product of the electorate and their desires? Because without making it too personal, you're advocating for these big transformative ideas, right? 2019. The answer was a resounding no, and I know it was more multifaceted than we don't like the policy platform. It was Brexit, it was Jeremy himself. There's more to it than that.
Yeah.
But, there have been opportunities, not many, limited, but Thatcher's another example, radical politician.
Yeah.
Jeremy's another, and sometimes they go for it, sometimes they don't. And actually, maybe the electorate is kind of saying, we actually just want a politician that's going to keep things kind of quiet. We don't want someone who's going to rock the boat too much. I've had enough.
I don't think they are, because, one, there's a danger of kind of being a bit victim blamey there. It's like, well, it's your own fault, you voted for it, The other thing is, I think if you look at, the personal ratings of politicians, Keir Starmer's aren't great. Rishi Sunak's are terrible, Liz Truss's were atrocious, Boris Johnson's ended up in a very bad place. But it's not like there's this kind of bursting enthusiasm for, this kind of big kind of move towards Labour in a positive sense. They're kind of the passive receptacle for a kind of falling out with the Conservative Party, rightly, because we have a two-party system. But there's not that enthusiasm, and you're not seeing it at the base of the Labour Party, because, even leave aside the Jeremy Corbyn era, that kind of blip, if you like, but even in 97, and it pains me to say this slightly, but in the run-up to 97, there was an enthusiasm in the Labour Party, and the Labour Party membership went up from about, I think, 270,000 or so to 430,000, 450,000-ish when Tony Blair won in 97. It went up. There was this big surge of, I want to be involved with the Labour Party. You're seeing the opposite now. Labour Party membership is falling. There's not this big surge of enthusiasm. There's not huge turnout in the electorate. There's not this kind of let's get them out, kind of, let's get the Tories out, I'm enthusiastic for Labour. I think there's an enthusiasm to get the Tories out, which by kind of default leads to Labour, but there's not this big enthusiasm. I was looking back, just because it was the 60th anniversary of him being elected, at Harold Wilson, who in 1963-64, that period just before the 64 election, which he won, he had something like a personal rating of 67% people liked him, and it was about 13% didn't like him. That's astonishing. We've not seen that about a politician for years. I can't think of it, not in my lifetime, I don't think. Probably not even Thatcher at her peak kind of got those sort of figures, because she was very divisive. There's always a strong cohort of people who really disliked her. But, where are the big ideas? Where is this big enthusiasm? I don't think it's there. I think we have got to take some responsibility. Don't get me wrong. I do think, the public, the media, us all as activists, as kind of, just the public. We interact with other people. We've got to have a more serious debate about politics, and sometimes we all get dragged into it. Twitter and that can be just as bad as the kind of national media in terms of deflecting us onto these kind of irrelevant issues and these side issues of a politician saying the wrong thing, or kind of misspeaking in a funny way rather than saying something bigoted. But these kind of side issues that aren't the big picture. But ultimately, politicians have got a responsibility to make our lives better, and it feels to me like politicians see politics as this route to get into power for them and have the status of being a leader. I think David Cameron famously said he wanted to be Prime Minister because he thought he'd be good at it. Not because he wanted to change anything or make lives better for anybody, but just because he thought he'd be good at it. And there we are. There's a privileged white man, private school. I think he went to Eton, didn't he, and then Oxbridge or whatever. I'd be good at it. Boris Johnson thought he'd be king of the world and would make a good leader and all of that sort of thing, and he's terrible, So there's this kind of, I think, a lack of taking politics seriously, and I think the public have lost faith in it in the process of it. I think there is this kind of, not that you're all the same, but this kind of you're all in it for yourselves, and multiple scandals over the years around lobbying, around expenses, around, other more prurient kind of scandals that there have been in politics, I think has given people that impression, and it's not entirely wrong. And so we do need a better calibre of politician, and I think if the parties were producing people who we all thought, blimey, there's somebody with some real substance, we'd probably all be a bit more enthusiastic about politics. If you compare, I don't know, the cabinet of, say, Harold Wilson, who I just mentioned, you had, like them or loathe them, Jim Callaghan, Anthony Crossland, Barbara Castle, Tony Benn, Dennis Healey, big political figures, like, loathe, feel indifferent about any of them. They were all substantial. I doubt in 40, 50, 60 years' time, anyone's going to be running through the inhabitants of Rishi Sunak's cabinet and going, oh yes, they were a substantial figure, or big brain, Dominic Raab, Suella Braverman, oh, genius.
Talking about those scandals, and I think there's the impact that the 2008 expenses scandal had on the British public, which was massive, and also in a way I think Brexit has contributed to that as well, because I think the kind of the parliamentary sclerosis around it, was very easily whipped up into a kind of the elites versus the public narrative, and maybe we'll talk about something else that sort of has fed into later on. But you're kind of there have been these either big scandals, or actually I'd say in Brexit as well, potentially transformative moments in British politics, because that is a huge decision, right, to leave the European Union. If we could talk about that briefly, actually, for a second, in relation to Starmer, do you think he should, or do you think he or will revisit the relationship with Europe? But he becomes Prime Minister. That's a pretty big decision, particularly if we're talking about the economic stagnation that we're seeing.
I think economically, our economy, he did this speech at the CBI recently, didn't he, which was kind of nail shut that thing he said about defending freedom of movement. He said, no, we don't want migration, we've been too dependent on migration, we're going to train people here. But we've got massive staff shortages here. It's not always a matter of training, it's just people who are trained don't want to do the job, and people who have been trained are leaving the jobs because they don't like the conditions anymore. I think, there's bigger arguments about, and longer term arguments about, do we need more investment to have a more productive economy? Could we have more, I'm going to get into kind of Aaron Bastani territory, this fully automated luxury communism or whatever he calls it. But, that kind of investment in automation and investment in a more productive industry, there's a serious point there as well. And to be fair, Aaron's book does make that serious point. If you invest in these things and actually you get more productivity, you get higher wage jobs, you then displace people out of those into other jobs that then you push wages up, etc., etc. There's that kind of demand-led economy approach. Keir Starmer's got to reckon with migration. Clearly, there needs to be an easier form of migration. That's not just food rotting in the fields from agriculture, or the massive shortages in social care. It's 165,000 staff vacancies there. Because you can get paid more to work in Aldi, and no reason why you shouldn't, by the way, get well paid to work in Aldi. But you get paid more to do that than you do to do shift work, where you're caring for disabled adults and elderly people who need full-time care, and that's a tough, stressful job that people should be well-trained and well remunerated doing. And anyone who's had a loved one in care knows how vital that is, and knows how important that is. Yet a lot of those people are being paid £9.50, I think it is the minimum wage currently, isn't it? To do that, or just above it. And unsurprisingly, people go, well, actually, I'd rather do a job that isn't shift work, nights, weekends all the time, and get paid slightly more than do that. And people are voting with their feet. So how do you solve that? That's a serious question. I mean, that's not easy to solve, and you need more people. Do you know what I mean? You've either got to get people who are not working at the moment for whatever reason. They're either studying, or they can afford to retire early, or whatever, or they've, I don't know, but probably one of those two things. There's not this big reserve army. There is, in the sense of there's a lot of people waiting for operations on the NHS who can't work at the moment as well. And if you solve that, but how are you going to solve that without solving the vacancies in the NHS? Again, migration plays a part there. So you kind of need to wrestle with that issue. Then there's the things about trade and friction with trade. You can have this mythical thing of, we're going to do trade deals with Palau and Micronesia and Australia. It's like, but people don't ship goods halfway around the world because they perish by the time they get there. That's why your trading relationship is that. If you want production networks, people don't want to wait months for car parts to go all the way around the world. They want it in a nice kind of easy to do thing. So he has got to wrestle with some of that. And again, he's got this slogan at the moment, make Brexit work, hasn't he? But he hasn't really said what that means. And he sort of said, well, we'll negotiate and we'll do that. But I'm sure he could get a slightly better deal. It may well be that this week or next week, from what I read in the press, Rishi Sunak's going to do some sort of deal that changes it, and all of the Lord Frosts and Farages will come out and say, this is Brexit betrayed again, and that's why it's bad. That's why Brexit isn't working. It's because these people are doing it. It's like you've had Johnson do it, you've had Theresa May do it, you've had, well, not do it, actually not do it. You've had Johnson do it, you've had Truss do it, you've had Sunak do it. When is the right person? It's almost tempting, to put Nigel Farage in charge. Go on then, mate, you make a success of it. Let's see how clever you are then. Because I know you can do the kind of photo shoot with a beer and going, oh, Donny Foreigner's running our country, I'll take back control, and all this nonsense that plays to kind of people's sense of nationalism and bigotry, unfortunately. But in reality, there is no such thing as sovereignty in the world. If you want to get things done, you've got to work with other countries, and therefore you've got to pool your sovereignty. Do you mean if you want to get most things done in work, you have to work with other people? It's not, I'm giving up my sovereignty working with this team of people. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I want a sovereign manifesto, I'm going to write it entirely myself. Of course I couldn't do that. Do you know what I mean? It's like anything. The world doesn't work like that. So it's not losing sovereignty, it's sharing your sovereignty in order to achieve something you couldn't do on your own. And that, I think, is, leave aside Brexit and the European Union, which lots of criticisms of the European Union to be made, but the only way you are going to achieve things, whether that's on trade, on security, on migration, on skills training as well, and other things where we've had good relationships, with lots of our students training around Europe and others coming here, is if you have those agreements, and you are going to have to work and do a deal on that, and that's going to upset some people who think that's betraying Brexit in some way to have any relationship with Europe, and those people need to be taken on and defeated, to be fair, and that's what worries me, is that kind of, oh no, I can't, I've got to pander to those people to get their votes and pretend we're not doing it. So they're either going to try and do it by stealth, in which case there'd then be that kind of slightly embarrassed look when it comes out you have been doing this, or they're just not going to do it in a substantial way, which means that things won't improve. So we're back to that kind of thing again. You have to try and win an argument. That's what politics is for. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think there's also an opportunity to lift the curtain a little bit and say, you were told that this was going to lead to a high skill, high wage economy. And in a way, they were being honest with you, but the people they were talking about, the bankers whose bonus cap they've just lifted. When they said to you high wage economy, they didn't mean rail workers, they didn't mean nurses, because now you're asking them for more money and they're not giving it to you. There's an opportunity almost to kind of take the sort of two big political issues, if you like, put them together for the Labour Party and say, do you see, they weren't talking about you when they were saying that stuff.
The rail thing's a great example. They've spent more on perpetuating this dispute than it would have cost to settle it. They could have given every rail worker an above inflation pay rise now with the money they've lost during the strikes. And you just think, this is balmy. Why can't Labour just go, do you know what, we would have settled it straight away, given them the above inflation pay rise, and we'd be better off, the economy would be growing, wouldn't have had this big hit on local businesses in the run up to Christmas and all the rest of it. Still going to carry on for months probably as well, because the government seemed determined to dig in. It's a false economy. And it's quite easy to do that. Again with nurses, sorry to go back to this again, but if you pay them more and we recruit more, you tackle the backlogs in the NHS. If you tackle the backlogs in the NHS, then fewer people are dying, which is a good thing. And more people are getting their operations and can get back to work, which means they're paying their taxes and, you know, the economy grows. This is not difficult. It pays for itself. And plus, you know, sorry to say this, but about a third of what you give to nurses you take back in tax anyway, straight away out of their income, plus more when they spend it in the shops and pay VAT and their council tax and all the rest of it. So it's not difficult to make these arguments and go, you know, this is what we do instead. You don't have to put a figure on it necessarily and say we'd give them this and it would cost this and we'd pay for it out of this tax. You just think, look, long term, the economy's going to grow better if you've got people fulfilling tasks that are productive.
Would you still vote for the Labour Party under Keir Starmer?
I'm a member of the Labour Party. I'm the chair of my local Labour Party. I'll be out canvassing for the Labour Party in the next election. So yeah, I will still vote for them because they're far...
Take a breath there though. Do you know what I mean? That hesitation.
I mean, look, will I be as enthusiastic in casting my vote for Keir Starmer's Labour Party as I was when it was Jeremy Corbyn and I wrote the manifesto? No, I mean, I don't want to be too, you know, kind of self-referential, but it's not about that. But it's, you know, look, as I said to you, I'm not confident that they are going to solve the issues that we need to solve in order to make our country better than it is, and get out of the state we're in, the kind of 15-year malaise we've been in economically. So no, I'm not enthusiastic about it, but God, even with the limited programme they've got at the moment, and I'm sure they'll announce more in the run-up to the election, they'll be a darn sight better than the Conservatives. You know, as good as I would want? No. Do I think they're going to be, you know, kind of massively anti-racist campaigners on the migrant issue, or do I think they'll pander to that and do a lot of dog whistle stuff? Yeah, recent history tells me they'll do exactly that. So, you know, my job as a Labour Party member, as I said, I've been a Labour Party member for 26 years. I wasn't, you know, kind of out there with the Tony Blair pom-poms in 97 or 2001 or 2005, but I was campaigning for Labour. Might have been selective about which seats I canvassed in and for who. And as it happens, my own Labour MP's all right. Do you know what I mean? She's quite a decent person. Probably would shuffle around if I was a member in Holborn and St Pancras, to be frank with you. I mean, I think he'd probably appreciate that as well, because, you know, I think I'm not too good on these sort of subtle pointers, but I think today his speech was like, please get out, you know, to people like me, which is ridiculous, really. I mean, I worked with him closely for years, so, but there we are.
Andrew Fisher, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Cheers.